Chapter 17. Leonie shielded her eyes from the sun as she watched the police drive away. She thought there'd be more to it, the death of a person. More questions and more answers. They'd given her a few leaflets on bereavement, expressed their condolences, and went on their way. They probably had a set number of calls to make, 1 an hour or something, like Ocado drivers. Music still thumped from Hannah's bedroom door. Leonie went over and knocked. "I'll turn it down." The voice came from inside. "Can I come in?" Hannah opened the door. Leonie managed to smile. "I'm just on Facebook. Fancy going out?" "Where?" "Wherever you like." Hannah looked back at her laptop. The school gave them out for free when you paid your £7,000 term fees. "Can I stay here?" "Come on, it's sunny." Outside. She had to tell her outside. She didn't want to infect their home. "We can get lunch somewhere." Hannah frowned. "We never do that." "Yeah, I know, but it'll be nice. A treat." Hannah's laptop was open and Messenger was pinging. "You can talk to your friends any time." Leonie grabbed Hannah's coat off the back of the door and chucked it at her. "Let's go." Anxiety fell as soon as Leonie stepped outside. The world had changed, become a threat. She felt alone. The man at the school gates had done that. Leonie hesitated as the music began. "You okay, Mum?" Hannah was looking at her sideways. Beautiful girl. "Come on, woman." Yeah, sorry, love. Miles away today." Leonie sucked in cool air and looked up. Suddenly, she had an urge to tell her right there on the doorstep. Blurt it out and be done. She dug her nails into her palms. "Not here. Try and make it normal. Try and make it as pleasant as possible for the child who had to be told their father was dead." "Mum?" They were in the car. Leonie didn't remember getting there. Her hand was on the ignition key, but she hadn't turned it. "Right. Where shall we go?" She hoped the 12-year-old could help her out, make it easy for both of them. "You made me come out." "Okay." Leonie started the car. If they didn't start moving, she'd have to start talking. "We'll go to the Horniman, the cafe there. That'll be nice." Hannah rolled her eyes. "Only 'cause you get a discount." She did. 20% for part-time staff. She hoped when Hannah was older, she didn't look back and think her mother deliberately tried to keep costs down when she told her something life-altering. What were you meant to do? Tea at the Ritz? She joined the cluttered afternoon traffic heading up Sydenham Hill, and the urge to talk returned. Maybe on the move was best, so it wasn't made out to be a big deal. Well, that was certainly the police's method. "Wham bam, sorry to have to tell you this, ma'am. In and out in under 30, leaving sympathies on the doormat like takeaway menus." Leonie blinked. Somehow she found herself indicating for the museum entrance. The chance had gone. She had thought herself out of it. As she waited for a gap in the traffic, Leonie glanced at her daughter. Auburn ringlets bounced on her shoulders along to the radio that Leonie hadn't noticed was on. Hannah's lips were silently moving along with the track as a woman alternated between rapping and singing about having money. Her eyes were glued to her phone screen. "Put that away, love." Hannah pretended not to hear. The white van's headlights flashed Leonie through, and she pulled into the Horniman's car park. "Can I have the ham and cheese panini, please?" Hannah emphasized the rhyme with a grin. "Of course." The waitress almost smiled. "And for you, madam?" "Whatever the soup is." Leonie recognized a few faces, but no names. Waiting staff turnover was pretty high, and her shifts were sporadic. The cafe was bustling. It seemed like Thursday was the new Saturday. Pushchairs clogged the aisles and high chairs reigned. Leonie watched a 2-year-old massacre a fish finger at the table next to them and thought back to when Hannah was that age. Michael was around then. The three of them echoed about in a new build, 5-bedroom house full of chandeliers and hard flooring just outside Chingford. Was Michael a good father back then? It was hard to judge. He wasn't home a lot. The club made the players stay in a hotel the night before a game, whether home or away, and often he'd have 3 games a week. But that wasn't his fault, and it was a small price to pay for $80,000 a week. But then, after the injury, the gambling took hold. Hannah was becoming a person, but Michael didn't notice. The addiction began to hollow him out, each loss and win scraping at his humanity, taking away any chance of him being a good father in slithers and chunks. Leonie called time on their marriage just after Hannah's 5th birthday. By then, the money, the cars, the houses, the friends, the family, they'd all gone. She was the last to leave, and it broke her heart. Michael spent his days in bookmakers and nights in casinos. Hannah had become something he daren't think about, like an income tax bill or his overdraft. This was 7 years ago, and since then Hannah had seen her father once. He'd called Leonie up in the middle of the night begging for help. He didn't want to gamble anymore, and if he could just see his daughter, then that would cure him. Leonie agreed, not for his sake, but for Hannah's. They met in town on a Saturday afternoon in July, Michael having pre-booked 3 tickets for the London Eye. It was disgustingly warm in the bubble. 15 other tourists fanned themselves with leaflets as the fiberglass orb, gouged by 20 years of vandalism, helped to magnify the sun. Michael's palms were slick with sweat, and when he tried to hold Hannah's hand, she pulled it away. After the 20-minute ride on the big wheel, they walked over Waterloo Bridge together so Michael could catch a bus. He didn't call again. The food came and they ate. Leonie sipped her soup without tasting it. She watched Hannah tear her panini into bite-sized chunks, then gobble it down. Maybe she wouldn't be upset, thought Leonie. After all, she had hardly known Michael. I'll tell her after I finish this soup. Leonie ate it with a teaspoon. It was too loud. The din of the cafe was akin to soft play. Outside would be better. Shall we have a walk around the gardens? Can't we just go home? Said Hannah, who'd finished eating 10 minutes prior. It's a lovely day. Might be the last bit of sun before winter. Leonie stood on unsteady legs. She was afraid. She had run out of procrastination tactics. There was no getting away from it now. Come on. Outside was refreshingly quiet. They left the cafe via the conservatory, an ornate white metal structure that reminded Leonie of a plantation house. The museum gardens were formal in design, with its grass areas trimmed to the millimetre. Violet Dutch tulips filled the borders and suited the bright day. Mother and daughter walked along the creamy gravel path, and Leonie slipped her arm inside Hannah's elbow. They were almost the same height. A wooden bench was ahead, set slightly off the path, overlooking a gentle water feature. The bench sat empty and inviting. This was to be the place, thought Leonie. They sat, and Leonie felt very sick. Christophe was in the passenger seat of the Tesla. They were heading south over Battersea Bridge at a surprisingly free-flowing rate for a Thursday afternoon. The car was clean now, and it pleased the Greek. He could sense the resentment at its enforced cleanliness seethe over from the driver's side, but it didn't concern him. He was used to being disliked by men and was fine with it. The main cause was usually jealousy. Christophe was 90s boy band handsome and smelt divine. We need to make a stop, Christophe said. Where? A florist. Florist? Yes. You know what a florist is? Where you get flowers? Yes. Why? The boy didn't need to be answered. Christophe updated the car's navigation system with the address of a florist he'd found. It had scored an excellent 4.8 out of 5 on Google reviews. There was a place with a rating of 3.9 a street over from their final destination, but Christophe didn't want quality to suffer for the sake of convenience. What says "I'm sorry" best, do you think? Christophe fingered through the cellophane-wrapped bouquets that stood in black buckets on the pavement. The pollen hurt his sinuses. Depends what you did, the florist asked, broad forearms folded. Ha! Christoph flashed white teeth. No, it's more. I'm sorry for your loss. The florist eyed him. So you want condolences? Yes, Christoph said. He could see the gypsy in her jawline. She pointed to a large, flamboyant bouquet close to the shop door. Christoph shook his head. It's too pink. She's not an old woman. She's young and full of life. He turned to check the windows were up on the Tesla. I wanted to say, I'm sorry for your loss, but with passion. He paused. I want condolences with a hint of desire. The florist studied the man through hooded eyelids. She knew what he was. She had served men like him all her life. A snake, saying one thing but always wanting the other. She forced a golden smile. But these types of men were good for business. Their dicks opened their wallets. Her eyes flicked over to the Tesla and then back to him. Not for the first time, she congratulated herself on her decision to not put price tags on the flowers. This one. She padded over to a bunch the size of whales. White lilies to show sadness, a little greenery, now pink. Her sun-worn face gave Christoph a conspiratorial look. And deep red roses. Christoph felt his loins stir. How much? 80. Wrap them. The florist bowed her head. Of course, sir. The driver had parked the Tesla 50 yards from Leonie's flat, on the opposite side of the road to the police car. Christoph hoped the police wouldn't be long. The flowers on the back seat were dovetailing with the new car smell to give him the openings of a migraine. He opened his window an inch and thought about the tone he should aim for with Leonie. Apologetic. Yes, but not overly so. He didn't want her to think that he had anything to do with her husband's death. No, the classic line, I'm sorry for your loss, will suffice. And of course, the flowers would go a long way. Christoph looked over his shoulder at them. They were gorgeous. As his dear mother used to say, flowers were the way to a woman's. The police were coming. 2 of them, a man and a woman. Christoph watched them down the stone steps that led up to Leonie's flat, cross the road and get into their patrol car. The female officer was talking to the man, who had begun to tap at a console screen on their dashboard. When they leave, we wait 5 minutes, then I go, Christoph said. The policeman had stopped tapping his screen. The female officer said something, and Christoph watched them both laugh. The patrol car came to life and moved towards them. Christoph's driver sunk low in his seat, but he stayed erect. The police cruised past, not paying any attention to the Tesla or its occupants. Christoph watched them. They were still sharing a joke. 15:47. When the dash clock struck 15:55, he'd go up there. Christoph flipped the sun visor down and checked his reflection. He was a gorgeous piece of shit. The outline of his face was cut into swarthy angles, shaped the way that men's magazines say suit any sunglasses. His hair was trimmed every 2 weeks, and he used sea salt spray to tame its natural waves. His lips and eyes were oval, with a dusky romantic quality like a deer in the half-light. He was also a rapist and a murderer. 15:53. He felt a little light-headed. When he saw her at the gates yesterday, he sensed a connection. Even after he took her picture, as she was trying to get to him through the crowd of schoolchildren, there was a look in her eyes that told Christoph he'd hurt her. He could see pain through her anger, as if he'd betrayed her. They'd only talked for 3, maybe 5 minutes at most, but it had been enough. She was his. He knew the pain he saw in her dark eyes was actually disappointment. Disappointment that they couldn't be together. Now he was here to prove her wrong. These flowers would help. The deck could be wiped. It's been 9 minutes, said the driver. Christoph opened the glove box, moved the 9mm semi-automatic pistol to one side, and brought out the bottle of Creed Aventus. adding its perfume to the in-car smell that now bordered on ignitable. He kissed the Son of God at his neck and put his hand on the door handle. "Wait," the driver said. Christoph looked up and his heart skipped. She was coming. Shapely legs wrapped in tight blue denim were descending the stone steps towards them. The daughter followed behind, pushing a skinny arm through a coat sleeve. This wasn't part of the plan. They were supposed to meet in the doorway. "Are you going?" the driver asked. Christoph watched them climb into a Renault Clio that didn't move. After a minute or so, it slowly pulled away. "Follow them," said Christoph. "Your father loves you, Hannah." The sun had gone in and a wind had picked up. Hannah shivered. She'd heard that same sentence from her mother before and knew it always preceded a talk. The wind was sniping at a neat mound of early autumn leaves. Hannah watched them scatter across the pristine lawn. Something weird was going on. There was the man outside school yesterday. Mum was putting tomato puree on eggs, and now she was talking about Dad. The leaves were being blown into a flower bed. They wrapped themselves around the petals and stems and turned the whole border brown. She hugged herself. She had gawkish limbs that she hated, and her coat sleeves fell short of her wrists. Hannah had bigger things going on in her life than creepy men and a dad she'd seen once in 10 years. "Mum, can we not do this now, please?" Hannah waited for her mother to continue on regardless, to go into a speech about how Michael had problems, but it was no one's fault and that she must never blame herself, which Hannah didn't anyway. But the talk never came. "Get the fuck away from us." The words had come from the person sat next to her on the bench, but Hannah didn't recognize the voice. She raised her head and saw anger humming from her mother, thick and hot. Leonie was still sat, but her head was tilted upwards and the tendons in her neck stretched out from her collarbones. A man was standing in front of them. His shoes were shiny, and he held a large bunch of flowers. "I wanted to say how sorry I was," the man said. "Hannah, get up." Hannah followed Leonie's lead and stood. The man was tall, so mother and daughter had to tilt their heads back to see his face. He smelt of aftershave and roses. "I'm sorry for frightening you yesterday." He was smiling. He nodded at Hannah, but didn't take his eyes from Leonie. "And of course I'm very sorry for your daughter." His face drifted into forced sadness. "Losing your father at such an age, and especially the way he died." The man held out the bouquet towards Leonie. "It can be very hard to take." Hannah frowned and looked at her mother. Time slowed. The cross around the man's neck jangled softly as he reached forward, and Hannah could now see every single detail on the golden figure. The way the feet were crossed over one another, the tiny stakes driven through the end of his arms. She watched the man offer the flowers to her mother, heard the crackle of the cellophane wrapping, watched her mother rock back on her heels, the gravel crunching as she pushed into the balls of her feet, saw the cold-hearted look on her face as she drove her fist through the flowers and straight into the man's nose, which buckled, then warped, then popped, then flattened. He staggered backwards and Hannah saw the blood begin to pour, falling over his lips, flooding off of his chin and down onto his chest, turning the golden figurine that hung there crimson. The man grunted and went down to a knee, still holding the flowers with one hand and clutching his face with the other. Hannah felt pressure on her forearm. Her mother's grip was tight. "Run, Hannah!" Leonie set off, back towards the cafe, pulling Hannah with her, but Hannah didn't move. The man, blindly, had grabbed the sleeve of her coat, yanking her towards him, throwing her off balance. Hannah screamed. People looked. The man was on his knees and looking up at Hannah, red teeth spitting blood. She tried to rip her arm away, but couldn't. The man was using her weight as leverage to help him get to his feet, and with it was dragging her down to the gravel, down towards him. Hannah screamed from her lungs, then stopped screaming as her mother drove the heel of her trainer hard into the man's face. They ran. The path curved on a tangent towards the exit, so Leonie dragged Hannah onto the grass and over the borders, making a beeline for the glass double doors of the shining conservatory 30 metres away. "Mum!" Hannah shouted. "If you let go, I can sprint." Leonie released her and they picked up speed, arms and legs pumping, the sound of their breath drumming along with their feet on earth. Hannah was fast, faster than her mother. The conservatory was close, 10 metres away. She looked back over her shoulder. Leonie was 5 steps behind. "Mum! He's coming!" The man was lurching across the grass towards them, his shoes struggling to find grip. His face was a mask of red, and he still clutched the bouquet of flowers. He stopped suddenly. Hannah watched the man hop from foot to foot as he threw off his shoes and dropped the flowers. Hannah screamed. The man began to run at them, hard. "Han, don't stop!" Hannah reached the heavy glass doors and heaved them open. Leonie was close behind, pushing her through into the cafe. The din enveloped them, the same noise as the canteen at school. "Help!" Leonie was breathless, her strength drained. "There's a man!" No one heard. Hannah was ahead, pushing down an aisle, squeezing past prams. Leonie followed her daughter through, and people began to take notice, brought to their feet by the wave of panic that was sweeping through the cafe. Children began to wail as they were ripped from high chairs by mothers. Fear had been brought into the cafe, and it was contagious. "Keep going!" Leonie's voice was shrill. Hannah had paused at the far end. She was nearly through into the museum lobby. She turned back and saw her mum scrambling past chairs. There was no sign of the man. Out into the quiet of the foyer, their feet slapping on the parquet floor like wet fish, and then into the car park they burst, Leonie scrabbling in her handbag for the keys to the Clio, her fingers pushing past pens and diaries, stomach churning as she clutched nothing but lint. "Mum, come on!" The car unlocked, and Hannah dived into the passenger seat. Leonie wrenched open the driver's door and climbed in, hands shaking with adrenaline. Fucking... Leonie was scraping the ignition block with the tip of the key, feeling for the slot that she could normally find in the dark. "Please, Mum," Hannah cried, unable to take her eyes from the museum entrance, where bodies moved jaggedly back and forth, muffled shouts. Then he appeared, framed behind the glass like an animal at the zoo, eyes flashing, blood dripping from his jaws. He locked eyes with her. More shouting, and then the doors were thrown open, and he came, pounding across the car park barefoot, the crucifix beating at his chest. Hannah had no screams left. Leonie was leaning down and physically looking for the ignition. The man was almost on them when she found the slot and turned. She slammed the car into reverse, and the engine revved hard as she pulled backwards, but it was too late. The driver door was wrenched open, and the quiet vacuum of the car interior was corrupted by the man. He beat at Leonie with his fists, horrible blows to her head and neck, and she released the wheel to try and protect herself. Blood was flicking off of his face and covering Leonie. Hannah's chest heaved from her sobs. The man paused the attack and tried to tear Leonie from the seat, but she grabbed the steering wheel tight, refusing to be moved. She pressed her foot down on the clutch, and absorbing more punishment she found first. The car shot forward, the man still clinging to Leonie, Hannah screaming again, then Leonie reaching across her body with her left hand, felt for an eye socket, and gouged at the softness. He screamed. She dug harder. He fell. They fled.